Alrighty guys, so I don't know if I said that twice or if it started recording yet or not, but in any case, so today we are going to be doing the breakdown of this illustration. I drew Owen, woo! I wanted to draw Owen for you guys and I had this illustration in mind, so I did this guy. So let's jump right into, let's jump into the breakdown first of this character and his anatomy real quick. As you'll see in the sketch, when we first start watching the video, make sure we got something good here, nice and bright of some sorts. Alright, something that we could see past. So we got the perspective lines here. You'll see that I marked those down real fast. These are the main perspective lines that are going on here. So we got these ones here and these ones here, moving like that. And then the other really important ones, as you can see all these things going down that way, is we have another one, so this 3-point perspective. So these perspective lines are going up like this, essentially. So now you can kind of see the grid and what's going on there. So now that we got that, let's go here, and what's a color we don't really have in here much that I can use? Purple, really nasty looking purple maybe. Bright-ish looking purple. Maybe that'll do good. I want to kind of break down the anatomy of him a little bit. So let's turn this down, put this up, bring this down, turn this white, and bam. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to go up here, do this, so that way it's more visible. So we got his facial structure here. Just breaking down the anatomy of that a little bit. And as you can see from the anatomy tutorial I have, we got that box shape going on here that would go back into his dome right there, his Owen dome, and then just his jaw area going down like that. So we got that, and then the neck just like that other thing too. If that tutorial, that anatomy tutorial, if his jawline is right there, that means the midline for this circle down here is right there. Means it's going like that. Means his neck is connecting inside like that. So that's where his neck would be. That's why we don't see that side of it. It's going down like that. Then we got these shoulder areas here. A blue will not show up on this, so I'm gonna have to go more towards like a green. Okay, so then we got his shoulder areas right here. Now if we were to break these down into cylindrical shapes of some sort, this is how I would definitely break it down. And notice this cylindrical shape here. If we were to go down like that, this wrapping around of the cloth on his hand, it follows that. That's one of the reasons why these form shapes are so important. Same with these down here. If we were to break down his arm within this, in case anyone was wondering what his hand looks like in this, it's going to look similar to that. Squiggly lines. But yeah, so the form lines, that's how these things are following, and that's why it's so good and important to follow the form, because you can also see all these folds that I did here are following the form lines of his body. So now we got the legs here, where they're definitely moving away from him in this sort of direction. Whoosh. in that direction, and this one is moving in this direction. So we got that, and I'm going to move back to the greenish color and then break that down. There we go. And these are all moving in this sort of fashion. I think of them as little squares on top of each other or near each other, just like little squares. That's how I view that. And then everything else from there is pretty much just foliage, so I don't really follow much. Like the bricks and stuff, they just follow the perspective. So as long as you know perspective well enough, like you're able to follow these kinds of bricks going back here, and their lines in the perspective and stuff like that. So the rest of it's like that. And then part of like these yellow perspective lines right here, that's how you can see this thing over here, this pole, and then this pole. You can really see that third point perspective working. That's one of the reasons why I actually put that pole there in the first place. So yeah, so now that we have that broken down a little bit, let's go to the video, start the video, so that way you kind of see the base and where I'm coming from as we play this along our journey. So it's not going to be like this the whole time. I started this in Procreate, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to switch it over to Clip Studio. So it's going to stop here in a second and switch over to Clip Studio. I like using Clip Studio in general because I just really like it, but I also like using Clip Studio for these videos because Clip Studio is accessible on the iPad and desktop, because I know not everyone has an iPad. So I like using Clip Studio because it's more diverse in how many people can have it and stuff like that. So you can see me moving along with, sorry, I want to drink some water. So you can see I put in some very light perspective lines in my very first illustration, the very first sketch. And because I already know my perspective pretty well, I was able to just go in and start drawing this stuff. And that may not be the case for you. You may have to put the perspective lines in. Took me a lot of perspective practice to be able to do this properly, but without as much guidelines. But that being said, I had a lot of trouble with that glove. It didn't turn out as organic as I would have liked in the end. Quite like I would have wanted to. I made it a little bit more cylindrical, if you will. But yeah, so this, just in case you're wondering what sketch brush it is, one of the reasons why this screen is in a somewhat weird squarish format is because I'm recording my iPad screen. I'm using the rough pencil. It's nothing special. It's a rough pencil that is available on Clip Studio. So I'm using the rough pencil. I think it's a pretty fun pencil to sketch with. You can see all the settings over there to the right. Oh, and the background just kind of popped up there. So I'm just going to say, yeah, the background popped up there because I forgot to record it. But the background was very loosely sketched out. So you're going to see most of the background just be inked in here. Since I knew the background was mostly just bricks and like some leaves, you can see them doodled in. So you will see most of them here. But in any case, one thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that I tried to do some thinner line art in this one. And I've been kind of, my style has really worked very well with a little bit thicker line art. And I tried to do some thinner line art with this one, and I started having trouble a little the way through. And you'll see that as we move along, and I still need to figure out the reason why for it. It felt a little empty as I was coloring. And I think it's just because my contours weren't solid enough in certain spots. And I ended up fixing some of that towards the end when you see that coming. But yeah, so the pen I'm using is I have it called the Real G Pen. The settings are pretty standard. I mean, you could do this with mostly any pen, but for the most part, that pen is just, I can show you guys the settings. I've showed you guys the settings before. I've talked about sharing it. It's kind of weird, but let's just say that one of the big things that make the difference is basically, let's pause this for a second and go over to this guy. So the biggest difference is that now that I'm on a G Pen is when you click these little dots here over the right hand side, when I click those, it opens up. This isn't quite what mine looks like, but the biggest difference is changing your velocity, you know, a little bit lower over towards the higher end of the numbers, because that means it affects it less, but velocity does a little bit for it. And then randomness, you want to have a little bit of randomness to it. So mostly, even if you don't have velocity, even though velocity helps a lot, you can play around with what you like. Basically what velocity does is, if you have a stroke and you make it really fast, it thins out the middle of it. So you can edit that, change that to how you like it, based on your preference. As for this, you can change that to your preference too, the randomness. Randomness helps with the organic feel, and then what makes it feel really organic is turning your anti-aliasing all the way down. So you get this, see, this canvas is really big, but so you get this kind of jagged-esque feel to it. And I'm just, I don't know why I'm using my mouse. But you get this somewhat, oh, there we go. There we go. So you get this somewhat jaggedy feel to it, and it looks really weird up close, but when you zoom out, it does not look like that at all. But it gives this traditional feel when you zoom out overall the illustration. And when you zoom in, you can see it. I used it on my illustration. That's the same pen. So yeah, that is how you make that pen. On Clip Studio, it's made with your normal G Pen. It's just slightly altered with those little tools, those little editors. Okay. Alright. So I'm just really following the guidelines now with the inking. And you'll see me try to do these circles quite a few times, which just wasn't working out how I liked it. I liked the organic feel that I was going for, but I knew that it may not turn out how I would like it in the end, so I ended up going with a more set kind of cylindrical shape for the top part. And all in all, in the very end, I was pretty happy with it. But and I used several different layers to make those cylinders work, so that way I could erase the lines easier. Like when I made a new circle to change it and edit it, I put it on a different layer so that way I could change it without altering the other cylinder that was there. And here I am just creating the glove around it. Like, as you can see now, it looks a lot less organic with that really set circle at the top. But, you know, I was like, hey, it's fine. I kind of changed the direction of the circle a little bit at some point. Don't know when, but I feel like, oh, I think I already did actually. And then I just draw in the little bandages on his fingers. And like I said, a lot of this is just following the lines that are already preset from the whole kind of, oh, here I decided to put in some sort of surface area within the glove. I didn't want the glove to be completely empty at a certain point in it, so I wanted to have it be like kind of solid towards the end of the glove. So it like fits into his hand. His hand can fit into it a specific way. This is the very first illustration that I actually did of Owen. Like, first finished illustration I did of Owen. That's like background and all. Not just that like headshot that I did. That doesn't count, guys. Here I am really trying to follow those perspective lines I laid out for myself. You can actually see there's a point where I actually lay, oh, I don't think it's come yet, but I end up laying in some perspective lines for the background, because I get to the background part. And like with these leaves, those were super sketchy, but I'm just using them as an outline, and then I go over it and do a better ink. And as for grass, I tend to like to just do it organically with my own 2 fingers. I only have 2 fingers. No, with my own 2 hands. Sometimes when it's a bunch of grass, I will use a shortcut brush, but for the most part, I like to do them by hand, especially for the feeling of this illustration I was going for. But yeah. Oh, here are those perspective lines I was talking about. I put in those perspective lines so that way I could draw these kind of brickish shapes in the background a lot easier. And what I'm trying to do with this scene is show kind of like an old bridge. But yeah, those perspective lines, I'll talk about the bridge and stuff, but these perspective lines are really important for those bricks, because I've done it before where I thought, you know, I know the perspective well enough, I'll just draw the bricks in, and they turn out to be all stupid looking. So I wanted to make sure I had those there for the guidelines, and that's why I put those there. But they're very important, very important. And then, so this background is essentially supposed to be a little bridge he's sitting on that's kind of near his little hut type of home that he lives in. And he kind of lives alone and lives like kind of in the slums a little bit, but like alone slums. He's not really near anybody. And this is a little bridge near his area that he likes to train, where he used to like to train, I should say. You'll see in the first chapter. he doesn't train anymore, but he will start. Whatever. Anyways, yeah, there's supposed to be a little bridge next to it, so that's the story behind it. Little bridge next to the area he lives in. And I was trying to make it look really nature-esque because it's kind of like a rundown little bridge. And here I was really confused on, so I did what I do with a lot of my illustrations. So you saw me blocking the color for him, and then I went to do the background to kind of set the tone. Right now I'm trying to put in the flats in order to really kind of just sell those flats. Like I've talked about before in my last video, I felt like I made my flats a little bit too dark, so I tried to go lighter with these ones. And all in all, it worked. I did tweak them a couple times throughout the thing, throughout the illustration, but not quite as drastically as my other ones. So it kind of worked, but it kind of didn't, because I can't really remember much much about the colors on him, as much as I had a really hard time with the background, because I could not decide. This is why it's really good to be decisive. I could not decide on the background for my life on what to do. Oh, you can see that I'm changing some of the colors here. Now that I have all the flats on them, I want to make sure they fit, right? But the other thing is I try to change the color of the background, because if you don't have the background colors how you want them, they will, and you go to change them, they might affect the way the colors on him work. Because if, you know, purple is next to blue, the purple may turn to a slightly different, or purple's next to brown, or blues next to brown, it might change the way the blue's going to look. So it's very, very hard sometimes. And the reason why I mentioned brown is because I didn't know if I wanted to make those bricks brown or not. And so just like my last illustration, what we're going to be doing is that system where we block it in, and I believe it is in my April pack over here. No, it doesn't have all the rules there, but I wrote down a lot of rules and stuff. And basically what it is you start with flats, then you put in your primary shades, and then you put in your deeper shades that are in smaller little areas, and then you blend those in the ways that you want them, and then you put in your highlights. And so the deeper shades also correspond with hue variation. So right now I'm moving into some of the primary shades, which you already see. I already laid out all the primary shades on him, but I don't feel like I laid them down as solid as I should have. But right now I'm kind of doing that, and I'm putting in some secondary shades as well at the same time. And I feel like the color of him started working out pretty well at this point, but then my background just didn't feel right. And I was like, oh no, is this blue too much against his blue jacket? His blue shirt jacket looking thing. But at the same time, I wanted there to be this blend of greenery and like brownish stuff on the rocks. So I had a hard time deciding what I wanted to do. And I knew that if there was a bluish background, his orange and red would pop like, you know, freaking, I was going to say needle in a haystack, but that's the wrong analogy. Because you can't find the needle in the haystack. But, yeah. I don't even think that's an analogy, actually. But anyways. So, there we go. I changed it to a very specific color. You'll notice that you'll notice that when I went to change it, to this very dullish, and you can see it right there. I'm trying to get back to it. Bam. Right here. Down here to the right. This is where I changed it. It was a very dull blue. It's more almost in the turquoise section, and there's a very strategic reason. Actually, I think this color is what I'm trying to shade in right here, right now. So this color is actually up toward this area, this turquoise-ish green area, and there's very strategic reason why I ended up deciding to try to do this, because if you go to blend in your oranges and yellows from your greens, this all works out. Your earthy colors mix in with the greens, and the greens that are in with the earthy colors, they all can mix in well with the turquoise-ish blue. But then the darker part of the rocks can easily mix in with those shadows of the rocks into a darker blue. So that was my thought process behind it. That's what made me decide to go with this. And I decided a lot of the lighting would end up being yellowish. So that was what I ended up settling on. It was kind of like really light bluish rocks, and I've never drawn them or colored them like this before. So when you do rocks like this, you can tell like the top layer of it. So I am obviously painting this, like, for sure. You could see blotches of yellow, blotches of purple, blotches of, you know, turquoise, and a lot of the time you may not know where I even started. And that was where I started. I started with a really weird looking dullish turquoise color, that I was able to then go in and put blotches of yellow, because that's the lighter part of a turquoise when it comes to lighting effects. And that's what those little highlights are on the rocks and stuff like that. And I've never done earthy colors like this on top of especially bluish rocks. So this is a really interesting play that I was trying to do here, because I've never done this before, and it was definitely difficult. And I tried to take all my accumulated knowledge about painting and put it to the test, and it ended up working in the end, thankfully. Don't know how, but it did. You can see me using those blues heavily in these areas, like those areas near his legs, especially since the bottom part down on the left-hand side, left-hand bottom, that's all water. It's going to be blue water, so that bottom part's going to shine a little bit more blue, and the shadow is going to be a little bit more blue than normal than everywhere else. Right now I'm just fixing in all the like not, colored in foliage, trying to get the overall picture. And one thing you'll notice is, look how zoomed out I am. There's a reason why I'm this zoomed out almost the whole time. And the simple reason is you want to be able to see the thumbnail version of your drawing. So if you zoom out, is everything responding the right way? Are the colors balanced? You don't want to go in and do a bunch of detail in one spot until you know everything looks right. Like the balance of the shadow behind him, the balance of the shadows to the left on that bridge. I want to make sure I got that. So this is actually the point right now where I decided that this was good enough. I felt like I had the overall picture, and I want to start going into the details of things. Alright, for those of you who don't know, my recording stops after a certain amount of time, so I started me recording again. That was probably like nothing, like 1 second to you guys. So, but in any case, alright, let's start it again. So we're at the detail part where this is where I decided to do a little bit more zooming in, more zoomed in than I have been during most of the illustration. And I'll zoom in and I'll do more details. And I'll go between doing more details and also doing specific details for the overall illustration. That's why you see me zoom in and out, a little bit in and out, making sure, is that a good balance of the green and brown? You'll see me doing a lot of work in this left-hand area, trying to get that, because that is going to be a big focus. Like your eyes, when you look at this illustration, you first look at his face, and then it goes down to his arms, and then you might go straight from his face to that plant to the left, and then straight to that foliage to the left. And I want to make sure the spots that people are really looking at are done really well. So I wanted to make sure they looked really well. And you see this like blend of you can see this like blend from green to brown to then the bluish, and that's exactly what I was talking about. If we go down to here to the color wheel with my mouse, we got the green. Okay, so green and brown go together. So the brown's the dirt, but green and brown kind of merge together like this. But then it also works since this is a weird turquoise color that's more towards gray, it blends well with that brownish green. And there's something I also find out later on as I go, is I found out that if I put a really, really dull gray yellow where the brown is, it starts looking even more like greenery / this muddy brown. So a lot of this ends up just being knowledge of color mixing. That's why a lot of people recommend, okay, before I get into that, so right now I'm just putting in those, I'm doing one of the steps of, I'm putting in the darker shades. There were some primary shades I didn't put into the reds and stuff, so I was making sure to get that in. And I'm going to be changing the color of the glove here soon. I'm going to put a solid color in for that just for the time being. But yeah, if you can see what I mean by the face right about now, this is when I felt like, I was like, you know, this face looks a little dull. It might just be the eyes. I was like, no, something about the inking was leaving it lacking. So I tried to color a little bit of the face, and one cool little technique that I like doing is changing the color from the face, like this whole bottom part. I took an airbrush, so you saw me select it, and I took an airbrush and I slightly put a little bit of purple over it. Actually, it was like more like a pinkish purple, and that's because, one, this blue is changing the color of his skin a little bit, and it looks a little bit more, it separates his face from his neck too, and it's not unrealistic. This happens quite often in real life. Of course, it's more exaggerated here because it's anime, but but yeah, so I'm trying to create that thickness. The face looks so soft, if you know what I mean. Compared to my other illustrations, there's a heaviness to the face in a lot of my other illustrations. Man, I feel like my voice is going out from talking so much. So then I started putting in detail into the hair because I thought, you know, one, I need to do detail in the hair right now. Two, I was like, that something, maybe the hair is making it feel off. And then I moved to the eyes because I was like, maybe the eyes are making it feel off. So I went to do the eyes, and I played with the same kind of color scheme as the background with his eyes, except minusing the blue. And so I went with like, or I ended up putting it, minusing the brown. So I put like a bluish turquoise for the dark parts, and then a bright green, and then yellow for bright green for the main highlights. And then for like the shines, I ended up putting like yellows. But yeah, so I dull out his face a little bit more because I felt like it was a little bit too bright. So I dulled out his face a little bit more, and I felt like that gave it a little bit more life. And at this point, I'm starting to feel a little bit happy about his face. I feel like it's a little bit more solid than it was. I end up doing a little bit more later on with it too to help it out a bit more. Oh. I must have missed something with that glove or something. I put the gold highlights on the glove, and just like the original illustration, I made like the mid glove kind of purplish, and then the fingers and the top part kind of bluish, kind of separate the glove a little bit. But all in all, I want the glove to be kind of dark because most of his uniform is pretty bright. Here I'm just kind of putting in detail into the face. This is when I was really trying to make that face feel even more solid. Because it was just so bland at first. Felt really washed out. So this is the point where I'm doing essentially the deep, you can see right there, bam, the deep shades. And so I already had primary shades, and I put in the deep shades that I'm going to be mixing in a little bit here and there. And also, I felt like his pant legs were a little bit too light, so I ended up airbrushing over it with a darker brush. Here, now, this is where I'm starting to go into some more hyper detail. Because I didn't want to just leave that as some like watercolor looking wash back there. And this was very difficult for me. It's just I'd never done anything like this, so this is very different. I always find it really hard to do those washes of like slight color over something like corrosion. Trying to find the right color for that, it's kind of hard. Except for like rust. Rust is pretty easy thing to do because it's all in like reds and oranges, and maybe a little bit yellows for highlights, but and into some purples a little bit. But this was like brown wash on top of blue, so I had to find like a happy balance. It was very strange. You're gonna see me putting in dulls and also some deeps, dulls and deeps. So dull browns and very deep, more so saturated browns. Oh, and this is interesting what I'm doing here. So I was giving this a shot where you saw me do all those selections, right? So I have all these selections that I made. And then what I did was, I have all these selections made, and what I ended up doing was, see, all of this brown stuff and foliage, this is all on one layer. So what I decided to do was I decided color select it, and then you'll see me go right there. I opened up the hue and saturation and luminosity, and I turned up the luminosity and the saturation. You can see it right here. I'm at 13. I moved this all the way up to 20, both of them up to 20, and then bam. I tried it again, and I turned them up a little bit more intense, and it created this kind of little lights shining through effect. But it only works if it's on the same layer. Like if I try to do that on a layer that the color wasn't on that layer, it wouldn't have worked. I felt like that moss didn't look like moss, so I put in a textured brush that I found on Clip Studio's website. When you have the Clip Studio on iPad or even your normal Clip Studio, they have a bunch of like asset brushes that you can like download. But that's not what made the shape of this moss. Now I'm just using, I ended up realizing I was using a weird brush at some point, because this isn't the brush I normally use. Right here it was when I was like, what am I using? And so I put in a bunch of pretty much splotches. I just dotted my way into making it look like, okay, now I'm back on the oil brush. That's when I realized, I was like, why does this look weird? And here I go again. I was just blotching in this moss, and here what I did was I went to the line art layer, and you can see it looks a lot more realistic now. What I did was I went to the line art layer and I erased the line art, so I can go in and put in darker colors on my own to make it seem like, you know, I didn't want harsh lines. So I erased some of the line work in order to make it look softer. Now I'm just kind of fixing up the colors and a lot of these details. At this point in the illustration, this is all just details and trying to sell the background and make the background actually feel real, not like realistic, but feel like it's there, that it's not just a painting, but it's like it's there. Because I could have left it messy and it would have looked painterly, but then there's the difference between being like, wow, that's some great art, and then feeling like I feel like I know this was painted, but I'm more still immersed in the world. And that's what I was kind of going for, the balance of detail between those two things. Because sometimes if I would have left it messy, one of the first things someone's mind might go to is, oh, wow, that looks very painterly. I didn't want just that. I wanted it to be like, oh, wow, that's a cool looking bridge, or That's like identifying it much easier with just the right amount of detail. And now you can really see everything coming together. Here, I was kind of balancing between if I should put the shade on his mouth here or not. I ended up keeping it there a little bit. And at the very end, I did change his face shape ever so slightly in, what's it called? Procreate with the warp tool. Because at the very end, I was like, you know what, I'm happy with this, but I feel like it could look a little bit better. I would be happy with posting this anywhere. So I was like, if I can make it look even better, sure, let's do it. So I did that at the very end. But so I went in and put like green highlights, green and yellowish highlights on this. It was definitely closer to yellow, but a green yellow highlight on all these greens to make them look more vibrant, because this is really where, especially that one popping up there. Now I'm doing the poles. These poles, which are essentially just, if you think about rustiness, you'd think here, if your darkest part is down here, that means your lightest part is going to be up here. So I put like orangish kind of highlights on this. So the darker parts are in like those kind of like purplish, rusty colors. Not really purple, it's like a pink almost. But it doesn't look pink, obviously. It's just the hue of that color. Or the saturation of it. Yeah, saturation. And now I'm doing this little part down here. I wanted it to be kind of like a red brick, and then I wanted to shine some of the blue water at the bottom down there. Now I'm getting into the water. So I pretty much just did a bunch of streamy looking lines. I didn't know how well the water was going to turn out. At some point I was like, this looks kind of weird. Doesn't look like water. But as I kept going and I put some lighter spots, this is when I realized, once I put this in, this is when I realized, oh, okay, it's starting to look more like water. So what I do is I put some extra highlights now that I put in a little blue overlay, darker blue overlay on it. And what I do is I then put in some dark blues between those highlights, and now it's starting to look like water. And because I use that same knowledge that I had for some of my other illustrations, sometimes it gets darkest near the brightest portions, and I was like, let me try this out. So I remember that water is more of a like one of those reflective things, so it's going to be deeper in certain spots, and that's what I did, and it ended up turning out looking like water. And I was like, it worked. I didn't even use any reference or anything. I was like, yay. Now I'm pretty much just trying to touch up the deeper shades in everything and hue variation. Trying to make sure this looks shiny, trying to make sure I change, like I knew I needed to change the little cartridge colors over there. Just in case anyone's wondering, those are key, like chakra, but key cartridges, and they hold pretty much essentially just like energy from another realm. It all has to do with the story in the very end. So I'm in the point right now where I'm going to start deciding to do highlights. I already started doing a little bit of highlights on the glove. One thing I feel like was lacking a little bit was the glove area, but at this point I was like, whew, man, I've already done a lot of work on this. I was like, as long as it looks passable, I'm okay with that. If it looks good enough. I didn't want to have it be like super like detailed or anything, because then that would be the standard for the glove for then on. The whole point of this illustration was actually supposed to be a little bit more stylized, but I ended up going more just my style with it. So Now I'm just fixing up some of the darker shades and still, and I'm going to be putting in the highlights very soon here. Oh, there I am. I'm starting to put in the highlights. This is before I've used any actual effect layer. So I'm putting in the highlights before I use an effect layer because I want to make sure that it looks good before I put an effect layer. Because I want to be able to tell myself, yes, I am satisfied with this. Now I can use digital effects to take it to the next level, make it look even more polished. Because like I always say, I don't want to depend on the digital effects to make or break my drawing. I actually kind of like this effect on the illustration. Who knows, maybe the illustration that I post, this actually looks kind of nice. Maybe I'll post the less effect looking version. Because I actually kind of like this look. Now I'm looking back at it. Because I did add some pretty heavy effects. It wasn't like crazy. It's not like that crazy, but it kind of washed out some of the colors. I don't know. Maybe I'll dull them down a bit. I started with the water because I was like, yeah, water. Yep, this is the effect layer now. I put it on the eyes. Start putting them on the browns. Actually, this isn't too bad, but I'm putting it on all the highlights essentially. Try to make it brighter, and then I put a very bright one in the back of him because I wanted the back of him to be a little bit lighter in order to make his hair kind of pop. And there we go. The illustration is done. And let's go back to illustration over here. So if we were to turn these off, turn this up, you can really, it looks way more saturated than it actually is, because this is in Clip Studio, which is kind of weird that it does this, but it always makes it more saturated than it actually is when it's open. Like, there you go. Like, that's so weird, isn't it? Like, this is way less saturated compared to, I open this, look at that, very saturated. So this is less saturated, and this is the finished illustration, and we got all these colors here, these browns, and notice it's still painterly when I zoom in. Still very painterly down here, you can see it, but when you zoom out, it sells the whole image. Especially if it's zoomed out even further. It sells the whole image on exactly what it looks like. And it kind of gives that feeling of, okay, this is a bridge, not just a painterly painting. But in any case, hope this breakdown helped you. Like I said, I like doing a little bit simpler breakdowns with more so bus shots without huge backgrounds, because I feel like for now it's more beneficial for you guys until you start learning my process a little bit more, because breaking down, like with these illustrations, essentially we have to go all over the place, and you want to finish everything a little bit at a time, which makes me have to explain everything at once, and that's a lot for you guys to take in. But I really wanted to do an Owen one for you guys, so I did this one, and hope you guys still liked it though. A lot of stuff going on here, but in any case, hope you guys are having a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.